Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm glad you could show up and join me for a little presentation I'm going to do on the Colorado Trail. And I'm excited to share my trip, my 19-day trip this last summer with all of you. I want to let you know that my presentation will be about 45, 50 minutes. And then after that, I am happy to stay around for any questions anyone might have as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. All right. So most of you know my name is Adam Salinger. My trail name is Dreamer. Most long distance trail hikers get a trail name while on a long distance trail eventually in their career. And I got mine back in 2000 while I was on the Appalachian Trail. I am the founder and the director of Alpine Adventure Coaching. I've been an educator for 30 years and a backpacker for about 45 years. I've hiked over about 20,000 miles with lots of different highlights, including a through hike of the Appalachian Trail, which I just mentioned in 2000. It was from Georgia to Maine, a total of 2,167 miles. And then a couple hikes of the John Muir Trail over the years from Yosemite to Mount Whitney, a hike of the Tahoe Rim Trail around the rim of Lake Tahoe, a through hike of the Wonderland Trail, which is around Mount Rainier in Washington, and then 3 weeks in Gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska a few years ago, coupled by thousands of miles of loops and lollipops in California's Eastern Sierras. But we are here to talk about the Colorado Trail, which runs from just outside Denver to Durango. It was finished about 35 years ago, and it's got one of the strongest trail governing bodies of any long distance trail in the nation at this point. It comprises 486 miles of trail between Denver and Durango and includes lots of high mountain lakes and peaks, 8 different mountain ranges, climbs nearly 90,000 vertical feet, which is equivalent to a 9,000 story building. And the average elevation of the trail is about 10,300 feet, tops out at 13,271 feet down in the San Juan Mountains. The trail, as you can see in this map, and you can see from the cutout down at the bottom, is kind of a diagonal route through the state of Colorado from just outside of Denver down to the town of Durango. It runs through 6 national forests and 6 federal wilderness areas on its way. It's divided into 28 different segments so that hikers can better understand where they are, and lots of hikers hike individual segments or groups of segments. It also contains the newest national monument in the country, Camp Hale Continental Divide National Monument, which is just outside Leadville. And it does split towards the middle. You can see right in this area, about a third of the way down towards Durango, it splits. There's a western route and an eastern route that offer advantages and disadvantages for both. And then most hikers do hike south. They start in Denver and they finish in Durango. And the reason for that is that the trail out of Denver for a few days is all under about 8,000 and 9,000 feet. So it lets a hiker acclimate to elevations a little bit easier than starting in Durango, where you pop up to 11 or 12,000 feet within the first day or so. So the 486-mile trail, which was about 501 miles for me with some extra walking in and out of towns and such, took me 19 days to complete. And the math for that brings it to about 26.3 miles a day, which is a lot. And I knew I had to kind of keep to that average. Of those 19 days, 3 of those were quite short of that 26 miles, an 11-mile day and a 13-mile day, both into a town or at the end of the hike, and a 9-mile day where I had to stop quite early due to a dangerous lightning storm. And then some of my top daily stats over the 19 days, you can see that my biggest mile day was on day 12, whereas my biggest elevation gain, loss, and the most calories burned were all on day 9, which was a huge day as well. So day 12, my biggest miles were 38 miles in that day. And then my most elevation gain, just over 6,000. And on that same day, most elevation loss, just over 7,000. And I burned almost 5,000 calories in that single day as well. And you can see those numbers again on this grid right here, which is kind of an interesting one to look at. Those numbers I just showed you are in yellow, and the bottom, those totals are what are always interesting to me, including the elevation gained at almost 90,000, elevation lost at about 87, and my calories burned over the entire trip at about 67,000 calories over those 19 days. I love data, and this is the worksheet that I use for every trip that I go on, and I fill it in, and it's a spreadsheet that pumps out some math for me. And I love diving deeply into understanding the terrain I'm going to be walking through, things like roads, location of roads, water sources, all kinds of other points of interest as well. And I always take elevation into consideration to help understand how long and difficult days are going to be. But it also serves a purpose of building a strong foundation of the trail before I get out there. I don't use this document much on the trail. I do have it on my phone as an offline document that I can look at if I need it. But it really serves as something that kind of lets me plan my entire trip prior to getting out there. So on July 11th, I got on a plane out of Sacramento at about 5 in the morning, and I landed in Denver at about 8:30. And months before the trip, I had reconnected with a fellow that I had sold some backpacking gear to online, who always told me, hey, I live in Denver, and if you ever need a ride to the trail, give me a call. So I gave him a call, and he picked me up at the airport. We drove about an hour to the trailhead and kind of chatted about my plan as we went, and got to the trailhead. And I hit the trail at 11 a.m. that morning, which was pretty late in comparison to really trying to hit that 26 miles a day I'd need to cover. Then in the lower part of this screen, you can see on all my pictures, I'm going to have the date, the day, and the miles hiked for that day. So you can see, even though I started at 11 a.m. in the morning, I did almost hit that 26-mile average that I knew I was going to need to hit for the entire trip. Day one was one of the hottest days on record in Colorado in 2023. And the first 8 miles through Waterton Canyon Recreation Area was extremely hot. There was no shade whatsoever. And I'd been told to watch for herds of bighorn sheep. And this was the only one I actually ended up seeing, one regal sheep standing up on a cliff face. Much of day one was in and out of an area called the Buffalo Creek Fire Area, which burned in 1996, and it's now really starting to come back. You can see the foliage in the foreground and the new pine trees and spruce. In addition, the first few days, as I said, were very low in elevation, not especially stunning in terms of the overall trip. So I took fewer pictures and videos during the first few days for sure. The first day was beautiful. Towards the end of the day, it started to cool down, and I got to walk into the evening sunset. It was a perfect ending to a really great first hot day. I'd had to been careful all day long with water on this day. There were some sections of the Colorado Trail where water was going to be sparse, and this first day was one of those. There was no water at all from mile 8 to 16, and then there'd be no water from 16 to mile 26. So I'd had to drink quite a bit at the water sources and then carry as much as I thought I'd need for those sections. And I'd be sleeping just half a mile from the next water source at about 25.5 miles at a volunteer fire station. So setting down my sleep kit that night, I was amazed at how peaceful my surroundings were. Even still in the fire zone, it was magical. I slept out in my open bivvy, which you'll see later. My goal was to what's called cowboy camp, which is camping without a tent as much as possible. And when I was forced to, I had a tarp as a backup, but I was not carrying a tent on this trip. Then my first stop on day 2 was that volunteer fire station. I made some breakfast, made some coffee, tried not to break any of the posted rules, and I left a small donation in that donation box that you can see. And you can also see that day 2, I was really able to increase my miles over my average needed to almost 31 miles this day. And most of this day was in and out of interesting rock formations and out of the fire zone, which was terrific. And this was also my first trail magic day. And trail magic is when a person or people station themselves either on or very close to the trail, and they hand out all kinds of goodies to hikers that are coming by: sodas, snacks. Sometimes they take your trash, water, all kinds of things. And on this day, there was a man and his grandson camping in a meadow, grabbing hikers as they walked by. And they had boxes of snacks and sodas and chairs and great conversation. It was all very appreciated on day 2. And after I left them, I walked through this beautiful meadow in the Lost Creek Wilderness area. And I'd set up camp just before filming this video, and it had started to drizzle. So I ran back to my site and I put up my tarp. I'd leave it up for the night, but the drizzle only lasted about 15 minutes or so. I got pretty lucky on that day. Day 3 was a bit of a scary one for me in terms of the overall trip. At about mile 71, I had descended to Kenosha Pass on Highway 285. And Kenosha Pass is interesting. You go down to it rather than up to it. And my knee was hurting on the descent in a way I'd never felt before. I rested with a group of other hikers at the road that were drinking some sodas, some more trail magic, and then I hiked on. But at about 20 miles into the day, I was limping really badly. My knee was hurting in a way I hadn't felt before. And I arrived at a creek with lots of campers that were backpacking that was right next to a road. And my goal was to kind of figure out what was going on. And if I needed to hitch out, I was going to be able to do that on this road. So I asked around. Nobody really had any idea what was going on with my knee, but one man mentioned he thought it might be simply arthritis. And that was the least of all evils for me. So I decided to soak my knee in the ice cold creek, have a little bit of an early dinner about 5 o'clock before pressing on, because my goal was to get to this place, Georgia Pass right here. This was the first major pass with an elevation of 11,875 feet. So this is when I started to get into that higher elevation. My knee wasn't any worse by the end of the day. It maybe was a bit better, but I'd gotten to where I wanted to be to camp. I like to camp way up high, and I like to do what's called dry camp a lot of the time. So I'm not camping near water. I tend to be near fewer people that way, and there's less condensation in the air in terms of being away from water, which is important when you don't sleep inside a tent. There were a few bugs this night, so I actually tied up my bivy, and you can see in the picture my bivy is in the middle there, and there's a ground cloth under it, and I've used my hiking poles to tie my bivy up, which I don't do very much unless there are bugs. It usually lays flat on my sleeping bag. And then the other thing you can see in this picture up in the corner right here is my bear bag. And the Colorado Trail does not require bear canisters, hard-sided bear canisters. So I opted to carry a Kevlar Ursack, which I much more enjoy. It's about a third of the weight. And unlike a bear canister, it gets smaller as you eat your food. So I was very appreciative that the regulations allowed for that. Just with like last night, I laid down and I fell right asleep. But I did wake a few hours later to raindrops on my bivy. And the bivy itself is water resistant, but I wasn't sure how long it was going to rain. So I quickly put up my tarp. And it only took me about 35 seconds to do, which was great, because I knew I could do that in the future if it had started raining on me on other nights. But the rain again only lasted a few minutes and then kind of went away. But before I laid down to go to sleep, I did wander around taking some pictures of the absolutely amazing sunset. And this picture and then this next video were two of my favorites. From the time I got to the top of that pass till I woke up in the morning, there was nobody. I woke up a few times that night feeling like I was ready to hit the trail, but I knew that my knee especially needed some more rest. So I waited till my alarm went off at about 4 a.m. and I packed up camp. And dropping off the saddle, the first thing I saw was the Continental Divide, the CDT sign. And the CDT is another trail that runs from the border of Canada to the border of Mexico, similar to the Pacific Crest Trail on the west. And it runs about 3,000 miles. And the Colorado Trail was going to share tread with the CDT for the next 235 miles. My knee was a mystery to me. I could go for maybe up to an hour or more without feeling any pain at all. And then out of nowhere, bam, I could hardly walk. Luckily, the painful periods didn't last long. So each time it flared up, I'd slow down and change my gait and wait for the pain to go away. This was one of the many interesting signs that day. For some reason, this was a section with lots of interesting named trails. And day 4, this day right here, changed completely this afternoon. My sister Lenore and her husband Dusty were supposed to meet me the following day with a resupply box. They live in Colorado and they're pretty central to the trail corridor, and they graciously agreed to meet me on days 5, 10, and 14 with prepackaged resupply boxes of food. I'd packed a box to send to them about a month before. And it also packed what's called a bounce box. A bounce box has extras of things like repair items and warm layers. It would serve as a safety net in case I had planned wrong or something broke. I'd even packed an extra pair of shoes inside of the bounce box. Here is all the food that I packed for the entire trip. The column on the far left right here is what I got on the plane with and got off the plane with. It was food for the first 5 days, and there were about 2,500 to 3,000 calories a day for that section right there. These next 3 rows were the 3 food drops my sister would meet me with on days 5, 10, and 14. And they had 3,200 to about 4,000 calories a day for the rest of the trip. And to get an idea how much my appetite suffered, half of all the food on this table ended up coming home with me at the end of the trip. Lenore and Dusty had rented an Airbnb for the night in the town of Frisco, right back there in the lights. And I was crossing the road the night before I was supposed to. And because of that, I thought that I might be able to hook up with them and get some Tylenol to rotate with my Advil and maybe an ace bandage for my knee. And I might even be able to get off the trail for a night and stay at their Airbnb. After a little bit of waiting, they were able to pick me up at the trailhead and we drove straight to the Airbnb. But unfortunately, the owner of the Airbnb would not let me stay the night, citing some kind of very strict rental rules. So instead, I used their gravel driveway and I sorted through all of my gear and my resupply box that Lenore had brought. And then we went to town for beer and pizza and pasta, which was wonderful. My appetite was doing great in town. And then to Walmart for some knee stuff. I was back on the trail by 8 p.m. And this is kind of where I was about 8 o'clock, hiking out 5 more miles, watching the sky get darker and ready to finish up almost a 26-mile day, which included 4 hours hanging out in town. Day 5 started with an early climb up into the 10-mile range. This is a range that extends from the resort town of Breckenridge to the resort town of Copper Mountain, and it tops out just over 12,500 feet. I stopped for breakfast that morning up at the top. My preferred hiking style is to eat breakfast a couple hours after I start at a really beautiful place around sunrise, just like my preferred dinner is usually in the late afternoon in a beautiful spot. I tend to hike until I'm tired every day, so the place that I camp isn't always the most beautiful spot that I stop for the day. So I try to stop for my meals in some spectacular areas. Once through the Copper Mountain Resort, I began gradually ascending the canyon towards Searle Pass at just over 12,000 feet. This was a super lush canyon with greenery and wildflowers and a pine forest on the left running up the middle and steep walls on either side. At the top, I stopped for some lunch and I met a few other CT, Colorado Trail hikers going north as well. And after lunch, I got going and I passed them as they were resting. I never saw them again. I actually only saw one other person more than one time. They were also the only person I hiked with for any length of time. I was hiking such longer days and taking such shorter stops that people I passed just really never caught back up to me. This was the only real mud I hit on the trail. It was pretty dry in July after a very wet June. There was no way around it. It didn't look as deep as it was. And in the warm, breezy weather, it dried pretty quickly and flaked off, which was good because I developed quite a big hole in the toe box of one of my two shoes, and it would just get bigger and bigger as the days went by. It was an amazing day filled with marmots everywhere at the high elevation, tons of wildflowers. And even in the late afternoon, early evening, I was able to see my first moose of many on the trip. Kokomo Pass at just over 12,000 feet was as spectacular as anything I had walked through yet. The 13,000 foot peaks all around me were lush with green foliage and wildflowers, really different than the California Sierras, where the growth stops quite a ways before the top. The Rockies look very, very different. So day 6 was a short day for me. You can see it, 23 miles. It would pass by a highway leading to the town of Leadville, a town that lots of other hikers had told me I should stop by and see and get a meal at. And I desperately wanted some more town food as I was having more and more trouble eating the calories I was carrying in my backpack. I'd hiked hundreds of miles with the same food, but for some reason, I couldn't get a lot of this food down. So I got a quick hitch from a CDT hiker and his wife, and I found a terrific breakfast burrito in town. The hitch back to the trail wasn't close to as easy. It took me hours, and you'll have to read my blog to hear about almost ending up in the back of a police car during that episode. And you can see the 23 miles were quite low because of that adventure. You can also see in this picture my sun gloves. I tend to wear sun gloves on all my hikes to keep the chill off my hands in the morning and the sun off my hands all day. And coupled with that, I wear a long sleeve hoodie and pants as well so that I can limit the need for sunscreen. When my hood's on, I just have to have a tiny bit of sunscreen on the middle of my face. And I'm not a big fan of sunscreen, so it's a nice collection. Holy Cross Wilderness was my first designated wilderness area, meaning bike packers who also travel on the Colorado Trail would have to detour because bicycles are not allowed in federal wilderness areas. The Holy Cross Wilderness skirts around two of Colorado's 14ers. Those are 14,000 foot peaks. Both Mount Massive and Mount Elbert are in this area, and I'd walk by the trailhead for each. Holy Cross Wilderness was also the first time that the trail got a bit more technical in terms of watching my footfalls a little more closely. This area marked the first lakes I'd be able to swim in. And anyone that knows me knows that I love to swim in lakes when I'm backpacking and try to swim in every single lake I pass. The goal today was a lake called Bear Lake. Bear Lake was a mile off the trail. This was the furthest I walked off the trail for any swim, but I figured I'd be the only one there, and I was right. There was not a single other person at this huge lake. I took an hour here to eat and swim and do some laundry and just kind of hang out. And I crossed into Mount Massive Wilderness as I finished one of my shortest days on the Colorado Trail. Leadville had taken a ton out of me. Day 6 continued into Mount Massive Wilderness, which I wouldn't be in for long, but which would have some of the largest aspen stands yet that I'd walk through on the trail. Before long, I was nearing Twin Lakes, a little resort town, and this would be a very rough section for me. I neglected to get water at a critical spot. It would have been in my best interest to use my offline document to remind me that this was a very dry section, but I did not do that. And I ended up walking miles around these two connected lakes with almost no water in a very hot, scorching sun day. A long time later, I finally reached a place close to the lake and I was able to filter a lot of water, but it was one of those sources that just tasted awful. And I covered it up with a bunch of electrolytes, flavored electrolyte noon tablets that enabled me to get pretty much rehydrated. This was the day the trail completely changed. This was the collegiate split that I showed you on the map. And I was choosing to go west. West is the higher, more rugged, more remote route. And it started with one of the biggest climbs on the trail. Hope Pass. The approach to Hope Pass started really, really rocky and got less so in this picture as I ascended. The climb was almost 3 miles and 3,000 feet. Climbs over 500 feet per mile are very steep. So this one at 1,000 feet per mile was extremely steep. This snow patch right here is where I'm aiming for the top of the saddle. The trail weaved in and out of boulders of all different kinds of sizes, but the trail was pretty clear in this area. And again, you can see the top of the pass is this snow area up here. The last 200 feet were covered in snow and gave me a terrific view back to the north where I had just come from, all the way back to Twin Lakes. And the dreadful heat that I had gone through down there was quickly fading at this point. And the top was absolutely amazing. The wind was howling. There were views in all directions under a blue kind of cloud speckled sky. To the north, you can see Twin Lakes way down there. And then to the south, miles of peaks that I would be hitting the next day. And this is the view from my camp spot just on the south side of Hope Pass. I had planned to camp at the top of the pass, but there was a weather system coming in and it ended up clearing out and being a spectacular, beautiful evening. And this finished off an almost 32-mile day. Day 8 started with a much needed charge. So a lot of people ask me how I keep my devices charged out there. My phone will last 3 to 4 days on a single charge, as I'm using it really just for pictures and video. On this trail, I used my phone with an app called the Far Out app, which is a GPS platform that gives you location information on a map, but also other updated information that you can update when you're in Wi-Fi that gives you specific information about water sources, which is important on this trail. My watch, which is solar charging, lasts about 16 hours while tracking my hike. And I love data before my hike, but I also love data during my hike. And this watch, it's a Garmin Instinct, gives me exactly what I need every day. What's important for me is my mileage, my pace per mile, my elevation gain and loss, and the calories burned for a single day. And this battery charger that you can see right down here with all kinds of fun stickers lasts me about 5 days. And I had 2 of these, and my sister had one and I had one, and I would trade out with her and she would bring me back a fully charged battery pack for the next section. The trail wove in and out of my third wilderness area, which was the Collegiate Wilderness, before getting back to a place called Lake Ann and another chance for a very cold swim, one of the coldest I had, and a bit of laundry as well. Lake Ann sits directly under the 12,500 foot pass, which is right up here, completely covered in snow. And this is the pass that forces lots of hikers to take the eastern route rather than the western route. It holds snow longer than any other pass and can be quite dangerous at the top. When I closed in on the pass, I could see that there were 2 other hikers in front of me. And a few minutes later, I caught up to them and I'd meet Wren and Sundial. Wren was her actual name and Sundial was his trail name. We all made our way over a cornice of snow covering the pass. A cornice is an edge of snow created by wind. It can be really dangerous to be on top of, as if they give way at any point, they can send a hiker into a free fall. So going up this bank wasn't too sketchy. I would not have liked to have had to have come down this section. But the south side had almost no snow at all, as southern sides, which are much more exposed to the sun, always melt out much, much faster. The columbine in this section, Colorado state flower, really started to pop. Another advantage of hiking long days was much more wildlife. All the moose and all the bear that I saw were either right before or right at sunrise, or right before or a little while after sunset, when most other hikers were still zipped up in their tents. That night was again threatening some rain, as you can see from the sky. And also just before a section of trail that would be really high and really exposed. And I wanted to get as far as I could before calling day 8 a day. This was the last of my light that day. And this was kind of the way it looked most nights when I finished hiking. I usually hiked till about 9:30 at night, when there was just kind of a cobalt sky as the sun had set about an hour before this, 45 minutes before this. Again, I set up my tarp because it looked like it might rain. And as I finished setting it up, it started drizzling. And again, the drizzle only lasted a few minutes. The next morning, I stopped a bit early for breakfast, breaking my rule of kind of stopping during sunset because this view was just too good to pass up. I stayed in this spot for quite a while, watching the sky turn different colors and eventually having some breakfast. Here you can see the pot on top of my stove, a bit of oatmeal and some coffee to start the day every day. The light just continued to get more magical, and a lot of the day would be spent way up high on ridges like this. You might remember from my opening slide that day 9, which this is, was the day with my most elevation gain and loss, as well as most calories burned. It was probably the day I took more pictures and video than any day as well, because I just stayed up high like this. This was one of my favorite sections right in here of the trail. And this was a morning I saw absolutely no one and had the trail all to myself. Staying up high on this day was just amazing. The views were stunning. The wildflowers were beautiful. When I finally came down off those ridges, I hit this area, and this was the South Park Railroad way back in the 1800s. And when they removed the tracks, the tread became perfect for hikers and mountain bikers. So the Colorado Trail adopted this section, and it is part of the trail. There was a sign, informative sign, that kind of explained and showed pictures of this area, and the history of this area was very interesting. And for the first time of the entire trip right here, I took the wrong trail. It was only for about a half mile either direction, but the worst part was it was on this rocky four-wheel drive road, which ended up being more of a creek than a trail. Day 10 was a short one. You can see it, 11.51 miles. I was headed into the Monarch Crest store to meet my sister. The morning started passing this lake, Boss Lake. I thought of all my favorite fishing friends because there were hundreds of trout that were surfacing in this lake around sunrise when I passed it. And later, walking through the most sky pilots I've ever seen growing in one place. Sky pilots are amazing flowers. They grow between 10 and 14,000 feet, and they're very rare in the Sierras, but I'd see them all day long on day 10. The final 8 miles included some beautiful ridge walking and was all made worth it by my veggie burger and fries at the Monarch Creek store. At this point, I was also able to switch out my damaged shoes with the ones in my bounce box. I spent a night off the trail with my sister and her husband, and they dropped me back off the next morning. These next 3 days were enormous. A bit over 34 miles this day, a bit over 38 the next day, and a bit over 28 the next day. So 100 miles in 3 days. Unfortunately, when I switched out my shoes, I'd also switched out the insoles inside my shoes. And over this 100 miles, I would have some of the worst blisters forming on the balls of my feet than I'd had in decades. Making the walking even harder was that this was the only section of the Colorado Trail that allowed for off-road vehicles, which spelled dirt bikes. You can see the tracks on the trail right here. They were from the 3 that had just flown by me just seconds before this. I think you can even see one of the dirt bikers, and there's dust in the air. And I would have dirt bikes passing me in both directions much of this day. I was now at the bottom of the loop where the Collegiate West and the Collegiate East meet. So now I'd be back with 100% of the Colorado Trail hikers, no matter which way that they had gone. Today was the day 11, kind of a special day for me. I arrived at Marshall Pass, which was kind of a big deal for me because this is where my sister and my nephew dropped me off in 2003, 20 years, almost to the day that I was hitting this area right here. And they dropped me off to hike 200 miles of the Colorado Trail. I only made it 100 miles before getting off. At the time, I didn't know that this was one of the least scenic sections on the entire trail, but also the driest section of the entire trail. I knew that this time, and although I was prepared, I wasn't necessarily looking forward to this section, which is why I was hiking long days and why I had decided originally that I might hike some nights through this area too. They'd be cooler and I wouldn't be missing much. I passed a Colorado trail crew and got to chat with them about their work for a while. They even gave me some homemade cookies, and it was fun to see the work that they were doing. A lot of their work was caused by these. And this is what dirt bikes do to the trail. Some hikers called these rocks baby heads. It wasn't fun to walk on them, and I could only kind of stumble through them. I couldn't get into any rhythm at all. So I didn't take a lot of pictures on this day either. Day 11 ended like most days, walking almost directly into the blinding sun in a southwest direction. I dry camped this night with very little water, with my fingers crossed that the next water source would be flowing that next morning. And when I got there, it wasn't. And about a half mile later, I came to this sign on a tree, which was followed by a couple of other signs that kind of told me hope was ahead. And this is what I found. There were trail angels, a group of women who were camped for a week making all you could eat pancakes for hikers out in the middle of nowhere with a trailer that had a container full of hundreds of gallons of water because they knew this section would be so dry. It was a super welcome sight. My feet were getting worse by the mile. I had some wet gear that I spread out to dry, and I was able to hang out and sit in one of those comfy chairs out there with some other hikers and take a break, because the rest of the day was on these wide open Jeep trails with no water anywhere and not especially stunning. And those roads went on and on and on and on and on all day long and into the night, where I would still be walking in the dark. I would end up stopping at about 11 p.m. and I took what is called a dirt nap till about 2 a.m. A dirt nap is kind of a quick nap without pulling out my sleeping bag or pulling out my sleeping pad. In this case, I laid down on this little light foam pad I use for sitting and taking short breaks, and conked out for about 3 hours, and then woke up and started walking again. And after hours of walking in the dark, hitting the sun was a welcome sight. But it was a sad sight too, because this would be my first day of many in a super beetle infested forest. The mountain pine beetle, and I think it's the spruce beetle, they both bore into trees and they introduce this fungus which kills the trees. And I'd see millions of dead trees over the next few days. The miles of flowers and animals continued on this day. It would be a 28-mile day into the town of Lake City. I decided to push these 3 days to give my feet a half a day or so a rest in town. They were as bad as ever, and I honestly wasn't really sure I was going to be able to finish the hike at this point. So some downtime in a hotel with some food was what I needed. This was the only moose I saw during the daytime on the entire trip. It was fun to stand and watch it for a while. And it was the only baby I saw on the entire trip. There was some interesting geology just outside the town of Lake City, where there were these big flat mesas that the trail walked across. So it was pretty easy hiking, and the columbine in this beetle-killed forest was amazing as well. Towards the end, there was a storm that threatened in the late afternoon as I got close to Lake City, but it waited till the next day. And at the end of this day, I'd hiked just about 67 miles in 33 hours. It had been a long, little over 24-hour day. This is my sister Lenore, and I arrived in Lake City where a church holds a community dinner on Sundays at 6 p.m. And I just happened to get to town at 6 p.m. on a Sunday, which was perfect because they invite all the thru hikers that are in town during that time to an all-you-can-eat potluck with some of the kindest people that I have ever met. And I spent an evening with hikers and other community members chatting and sharing, and it was wonderful. And then I headed over across the street to my hotel room. My wife Paula had been able to arrange for me at the very last minute, which I was extremely lucky for. And my sister and her husband met me the next day. We had some lunch and they had some much needed supplies for me, mainly my last food box, but also all kinds of things for my feet to help alleviate the pain. My hope was that using what they brought would be able to get me through my days and allow me to finish the trail. Hiking out of Lake City the next day, I was headed right into the center of that storm that never materialized the day before. And as the storm came at me from all sides, I knew that I'm going to have to cut my day short because the next day was going to be all up high. So there were 18 miles ahead of me that were all above tree line with no cover from lightning. So to keep myself safe, I'd be forced to stop just 10 miles after starting on this day to keep myself safe. And the drizzle started as I found some trees to camp in, and my tarp was up as the rain started to fall. This was the only hard rain that I experienced. And this is me and my bivvy inside my tarp. It was a long afternoon of hiding from the rain, but I stayed dry and I stayed warm, and I was ready for the next day. And as always, getting up early and walking into the sunrise was spectacular. The colors and the silence were amazing. I was the only one out there that morning. And there was no hint of the big storm that had just happened the day before. The colors that morning just got better. Today would be the high 23, a section that stayed over 12,500 feet for 23 miles. And the weather was perfect today. This was the section that I definitely didn't want to be the day before in that storm. No cover, no trees. The ridge walk continued. And as the ridge walk continued, my feet started to get a little better. The blister pain never fully went away, but from this day on, it was manageable. And even once I got home from my trip, it took another week or two for the pain to completely go away. But this day was kind of magical for that reason. Because I was staying so high this day, I'd encounter quite a bit of snow throughout the day, mostly snow patches that were pretty easy to walk across, some that had some steep areas that I had to be more careful. And this day also found me at the high point of the Colorado Trail, which in retrospect was not as spectacular as a lot of the places that I had walked through. And you'll kind of see that in this video with a little 360-degree view of the high point. I was entertained all day this day, colors and textures. It was quite windy, but the views were amazing all day long. And the fact that there was some snow left to contrast with the greens just made it all that much more special. This is when I headed into yet another wilderness area, another area that bike packers would have to go around. And it was a day that I stopped a little earlier than I had planned. Even though I was over my daily average at 26, I had hit almost 28 miles this day. But I stopped early because this was the best camp spot that I had for the entire trip. And you can kind of see my whole setup here. You can see my bivvy with inside. You can see that orange sleeping pad, my sleeping bags in there. I've got a stuffed sack that folds out into a pillow, and that's in the middle right here. And then my backpack and my couple things of water. And then I stick some of my gear inside my bivvy right here. But the reason I love this spot, it was a dry camp, like so many, but I had this perfect view of Arrow and Vestal peaks in the background right there, and I could just lay in my sleeping bag and watch the light change all afternoon, journaling and just hanging out. And it was spectacular to watch the sunset on those two peaks. Continuing on the next morning, I just wanted to soak up this area and the view before one of the biggest descents of the entire trail into what's called the Elk Creek drainage. So I stayed up on these mesas for quite a while. Hi. This was a stunning area. It was also where I said goodbye to the Continental Divide Trail after sharing its tread for about 235 miles. And just before the big drop, I was able to walk through some of the best wildflowers of the entire trip. This was the beginning of a huge 4,000-foot drop, excuse me, over 8 miles down to the Animas River, which you can't see. But if you look really closely, you can see the trail winding its way down into the canyon down there. And this was the place that I ran into the hiker. Her trail name was Balloon, that I had hiked with a few days before, and we got to hike again together on this day, which was nice to see an old friend. I did not have a traffic jam on this day. Instead, I had these sheep and the mountain bikers coming towards me in the distance, and I had to wait quite some time before we got a chance to continue through them. The day continued up on high mountain mesas. Lots of wildlife on this day as well. Day 17 started with a beautiful sunrise while on the trail. This is what I usually walked into every single morning. Again, while most hikers were zipped up in their tents. The sky and the ground were perfect contrast for much of the day. These flowers in front of you are paintbrush. Again, another afternoon chance of thunderstorms did not materialize. I got so lucky as the monsoon season, which usually starts around when I started my hike, was still holding off. And then there was this area with these beautiful wildflowers and this bird that did not want me to pass. It was really defending its area and not too happy that I was hanging out and trying to pass where he was. And as the sky got darker that afternoon, the wildflowers really started to pop and to be more stunning. There were only 2 fords on the Colorado Trail, times that I had to walk through the water. Both times the water was up to about my knees. The rest of the water crossings were either over bridges or rocks or logs. And towards the end of this day, day 17, I'd get to one of the last bridge crossings in terms of walking over a tree to get over a creek and not have to get my feet wet. So the trail finally rose on day 17 up to a ridge, and I was able to watch the spectacular lightning and thunderstorm and rainstorm come my direction. So I found an area right up on this ridge that was just absolutely beautiful, and I set up my tarp because it looked like I was going to get some rain again on this night. And this is what my tarp looks like when it is set up. You can see it's set up with a hiking pole in the back there, and it's set up with a hiking pole in the front. It's called a sling fin tarp. It comes all the way to the ground, and the tarp with the ground cloth and 6 stakes all weigh in at just about 13.4 ounces. So it's just under a pound for my full shelter, which is amazing. Day 18, I took this picture as the sky turned from black to cobalt blue in my favorite part of the morning every single day. And right around this time, I saw some glowing green eyes and got my headlight on it, and it was a passing gray fox. And like clockwork, that morning, I found a beautiful place to sit and have some coffee. I'd moved on from what I consider to be those Starbucks sleeves that are, in my opinion, really bitter, to these portable coffee filter bags, like this one right here. So I fill them with my favorite coffee at home, and I use an iron to seal the top of them. And then when I get out to where I'm coming in the backcountry, I just pull off the top part, fit it into my cup, and I can get two nice strong cups of coffee in the morning with one of these. The second to last day, all kinds of beautiful wildlife and big, big views, and views that just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. This section also included some pretty rocky ridgeline where I really had to watch my steps carefully as well, kind of slowed me down in this area. Couldn't keep my rhythm as easily as on more flat, smooth terrain. But it was also a day filled with lots and lots of animals and more ridge walks towards the later part of the day where you could see the trail way up ahead of you in the distance. This was a kind of a knife edge ridge walk that was pretty spectacular and windy. And this was Taylor Lake. And it was a place I was aiming to get for dinner and a swim. This was the second to last day of my trip, and I felt like I kind of owed it to my wife and daughter who were picking me up in Durango to go for a swim and clean myself off a little bit. And I did want to also get one more swim in as well. And I had dinner down there and met some different hikers while I was hanging out. And finally, it was day 19, and it was the last day of my hike. It was surreal, really. And I was actually going to finish on my 55th birthday, exactly like I had planned, even with the setbacks that I had had on the trail. I knew I was going the right way. And even the animals were leading the way on this one. I stopped at a place called Goody's Rest at just 9 miles from the finish. Goody Gaskell is the person who spearheaded the creation of Colorado's longest trail, the Colorado Trail. I visited with some day hikers here while I rested and I ate, and some other day hikers again gave me some fresh baked cookies and some fruit, which was wonderful as I kind of tried to time my end of the trail. And the end of the trail was super lush and beautiful, nothing like I had seen in weeks, because now I was kind of at the same elevation I had been at when I started the trail almost 3 weeks ago. And then just like that, I was done. I was celebrating being done with the trail. I was celebrating being 55. As I got to the end of the trail, my daughter was running towards me with this sign that she had made, and I got to celebrate with my two favorite people on the planet. So it was pretty cool. I've never finished a hike and been picked up by my family, so that made it pretty special. And the hike was really everything I want it to be. Everything went right, and the things that went wrong turned out to really have gone right too. I learned a ton, as I always do when I'm out there, and I brought back even more knowledge and confidence in myself than ever. And I'd grown a ton from this experience, and now had even more to share with my family and my friends and my clients with my new business, because the goal at Alpine Adventure Coaching is empowering future long distance backpackers with the critical skills and the confidence to plan, prepare, and complete a journey filled with diverse outdoor challenges. And what can we do? What does Alpine Adventure do while you're here? We've got a 12-hour virtual interactive class that covers everything that future backpackers need. We work on building gear kits for our clients in terms of personalizing that gear kit compared to your hiking style and your budget. We do gear shakedowns where we help fine tune your chosen kit that you already have with a combination of looking at weight and performance and durability. And then finally, trip planning. Can plan entire trips for or with you, which provide daily trail mileage and elevation data, water availability, nutrition needs, approximate hiking time, camp spots, resupply, 0-day recommendations. And I use that same data sheet spreadsheet that you saw at the beginning that I've been using for years for myself. And now I'm using that for all of my clients I'm working through as well. And you can find us at and more adventure, more information about us at Alpine Adventure Coaching. Our website has all kinds of information and also has my Colorado Trail journal that I kept, which has much more detailed information than I had time to share. And then we're on all social media networks as well. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my video and stop sharing my screen. And thank you all for coming, and let you know that if you've got some questions, I'm happy to hang out for a little while and answer anything that anybody's got to ask. You can feel free to unmute, and you can let me know what you're interested in knowing a little more about. If anybody's got any questions at all.
I have a question.
Yes.
Regarding your knee, was there anything that you do differently in the future to deal with that or mitigate that or prepare for that? Have you thought about what you're going to do on the next one if it happens again?
Maybe take it a little slower on the downhills. I think that I think that's probably my key. I've had some knee issues since the trip that have been different than the ones I had on the trip, and I think taking more time and being a little more careful on the downhills. A lot of the time, people that don't necessarily do a lot of hiking think that the downhills are the easiest part and maybe the uphills are the hardest, but those downhills are quite hard on the body, and especially the knees and the joints. And I think in the future, I need to kind of slow my roll a little bit on the downhills, and that will help hopefully mitigate some of the problems that I had on the Colorado Trail for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else from anybody before we close it up? Thanks for that.
Adam, that was terrific. And I was going to ask about your knee too, but you've already answered that question. I was really impressed that you, what doses of ibuprofen or naproxen were you taking for your knee?
I was using the recommended alternating back and forth between 200 milligrams of Motrin and 200 milligrams of Tylenol every 4 hours, which is kind of the accepted wilderness first aid use of those instead of heavier drugs. So I was doing that recommended alternating back and forth, and that seemed to help quite a bit, although the pain was kind of a mystery. As I said, it would come and go, and it didn't really last. So I'm not so sure that the medication did the trick. I think that it just kind of went away, which I was pretty lucky about. The pain that was more intense was definitely the blister issues that I was having.
Right.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So do you ever get spooked out on the trail? Do you ever run into people that you're kind of a little leery of, or just situations where you maybe, aren't comfortable with, and what do you do at that point?
It's a good question. And in terms of non-human beings, things really don't spook me. Non-human issues in terms of animals or dark nights and those kinds of things. In all of my years of hiking and being in the backcountry, I've really only been spooked 2 times. One, kind of in my backyard here in Desolation, with a fellow that was on the trail sitting with a duffel bag out in the middle of nowhere, really not looking like he was supposed to be there, watching me the entire time I approached him, and then watching me the entire time I walked away. And the other time was a hitchhike on the Appalachian Trail when I got in the back of somebody's car and they had a snarling dog that was inches from my face the entire time. For the hiker, I just kind of tried to walk away as quickly as I could. And for the dog, I tried to calm the dog, and the man told me that the dog was doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing, and I should not talk to the dog. So I've been pretty lucky in terms of human encounters and only been really spooked a couple times. And as I said, the other things don't really spook me or scare me. The one thing that can get my hairs raised a bit is lightning. And that was a big one going into the Colorado Trail. And I got very lucky that I did not have to divert my plan more than one time in terms of being in a really exposed area. So the lightning is something that feels so unpredictable and you can't do anything about. So I guess that's one thing in the backcountry that can really spook me. And I got lucky on this trip that it only took its toll one time.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hey, Adam, Zach here. I didn't have a question, but just had a comment. Amazing stuff. I can't believe the amount of miles that you cover in a day up there, but it was really informative. And I finally figured out why you do all this. And it's because there's all you can eat pancakes up there. I never knew that. So I have to join you next time.
Thanks.
Good stuff, buddy.
Thanks. It is nice to be able to eat whatever you want on a journey like this when you know you're burning those kind of calories. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, the miles come because I hike really long days. I don't hike a lot faster than a lot of people, faster than some, but I do like to start, before sunrise and hike till after sunset. And when I'm hiking 16 hours a day and most others are hiking maybe 8 or 10 hours a day, it definitely affords me more miles for sure. Yeah. Anything else from anybody? Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. If you know somebody who didn't get a chance to see this, it's recorded, so I'm going to throw it up on my website and also up on my YouTube channel. And I'm hoping to put more of these together because I've got lots of trips and lots of media in terms of pictures and videos. So look for some more of these in the future. And if you're local, I hope to be doing some presentations locally in person as well. So thank you all so much for being here. And I hope you have a terrific rest of your weekend. Thanks a lot.